my last video, I covered Toei's first attempt at rebooting the original Kamen Rider. It must have been gone pretty well because in 2007 they released its sequel, Kamen Rider the Next. Where do I begin with this film? At first glance you may think it's a remake of Kamen Rider V3. I mean, there he is in the cover. I never watched V3, so I checked out the first few episodes and read through the wiki pages for good measure, and I can confirm that this film has nothing to do with the television series. More on that later. The thing is, Kamen Rider the First was a simple but enjoyable superhero flick, so talking about the plot was pretty straightforward. For reasons I'll get into later, this movie is an entirely different beast. So for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to be talking about the story in two segments. First I'll talk about the main storyline involving the Riders and Shocker, and then I'll cover the secondary plot, which I'll save time talking about until I get into it. Trust me, if you haven't already seen this movie, you have no idea what's coming. Our story begins 2 years after the end of the first film. Takeshi Hongo is living life as a high school science teacher. The poor guy is trying his best, but things are going less than smoothly with his students, one of which he notices is having a pretty hard time. Her name is Kotomi, and apparently she must have pissed off Fruit Jesus in the past life, because she has it rough. Constant bullying, divorced parents, and she lives alone in a crappy apartment with limited access to food. But believe it or not, none of those things are why she's upset. Her best friend Chiharu is a famous pop idol and hasn't been in touch with her for 2 months. Takeshi thinks it might just be because of work, after all being an idol must keep you pretty busy, but Kotomi suspects there's something else going on, since the last time she was in touch with Chiharu, she said she wanted to die. Being the good Samaritan that he is, Takeshi volunteers to help Kotomi find her friends and the two decide to visit her house. When a team of Shocker agents appear to assassinate Takeshi, they must still be pretty pissed about him blowing up their last house. And by appear, I mean just kind of show up. They even brought a small army of mass-produced Kamen Riders, which is a strange decision to say the least. You think after the last two Grasshopper-themed cyborgs betrayed them, they wouldn't have so many? I don't know, maybe they think it can't happen a third time. We'll see about that. Now, the BDSN chick with the chainsaw hand? Peak villain design. Ichigo tries to fight them off, but is ultimately forced to retreat, being outnumbered 10 to 1. Well, that didn't go well. Let's see how number 2's doing. Kamen Rider Nigo, whose name is Hayato Ichimonji, not Tobe Tachibana, thanks for Jaime Martinez for catching that, seems to be doing pretty well for himself, partying at one of those hostess clubs you see all the time in those Yakuza games. Unfortunately, looks can be deceiving. Remember the whole blood dialysis thing from the last movie? Well, 2 years later and it's really biting him in the ass. Whatever time he has left, it can't be very long. We'll get back to him in a minute. After escaping from Shocker, Takeshi and Kotomi decide to visit Chiharu's brother Kazumi Shiro to see if he has any answers. He used to be the president of a successful IT company until all his employees disappeared in a mysterious incident that I'm sure has nothing to do with the Robo-Nazi Illuminati. He's been a shut-in ever since the incident and hasn't been seen in months. They sneak into his mansion and find Kazumi waiting for them. As it turns out, he's actually Shocker's new golden boy, Kamen Rider V3, although they never call him that in the film. In fact, now that I think about it, I don't think any of the pro-techs are mentioned by their rider names in either film. It's like a Spider-Man movie where everyone just calls him Peter Parker. It's kinda weird. Ichigo finds himself surrounded once again, but luckily Nigo shows up from out of nowhere to lend him a hand. I'm not sure how he knew he was in trouble. It's not like he's been actively hunting down Shocker bases or anything. In fact, hang on a second. Why haven't the writers taken the fight to Shocker? Did they really think an organization of mad scientists and crazed cyborg assassins would just leave them alone after they betrayed them and wrecked one of their bases? And for that matter, where the hell is Asuka? Not only does she not appear in this film, but not a single damn person even mentions her by name. Is she in hiding? Did Shocker finally get to her? I don't know. She just isn't here. It's like the writers forgot about her, which is a problem because not only did she have knowledge of Shocker's existence, which is the reason why she had a target on their head in the first film, but she's also kind of the love interest for both the writers, so what the hell? Anyways, the Bug Boys do some catching up, at least until Kazumi arrives and reveals his tragic backstory. The day his employees disappeared, a bunch of men in hazmat suits barged into the office claiming the building contained a deadly virus and that everyone inside needed to be quarantined. Of course, the hazmat dudes were Shocker agents, and the virus in question was their latest weapon. Experimental nanomachines that can convert anyone into a cyborg then and there. That's how Kazumi became V3 and how everyone else became a corpse. He then goes on this little speech of how life never filled him with the same satisfaction that he experienced from working with Shocker, making it clear that he's fairly deep in the Kool-Aid. But when Takeshi gets a phone call from Kotomi mentioning that something is wrong with his sister, he seems to regain a bit of sense. Earlier, Kotomi had tried to see Chihiro during a photo shoot when she started freaking the fuck out that someone was trying to kill her. So, all of our protagonists meet up in a disclosed location, and Chiharu spills the beans. She is not actually Chiharu, but a doppelganger. Now it's time to rewind a bit and talk about this movie's other plot. Chiharu is currently the most popular pop idol across all of Japan. Everyone in the country seems to know her name. One day she decides to give her brother a surprise visit at work, but begins to feel sick and leaves shortly after, managing to drive off just as a group of guys in hazmat suits arrive. The next morning, Chiharu begins heading to work when two of her fellow idols decide to prank her by pushing her down a flight of stairs, which could have been fatal in its own right, but on her way down, the poor girl flies face first into an electrical panel.
Oh well, he's dead.
Is what I would say, but since nanomachines harden in response to physical trauma, Chiharu survives her murder attempt, but not unscathed. Spiraling into depression, Chiharu decides to attempt suicide, which, I don't know man, if breaking your neck on a staircase and getting electrocuted didn't do you in, I'm not sure what will. Either way, Japan's #1 idol is now a street pancake. But because she's just that freaking popular, her shady as hell manager has the other idols surgically altered so they can take Chiharu's place. Ever since the incident, however, rumors began spreading about people dying whenever her music is played, and Chiharu's imposter starts seeing a bandaged figure in the mirror. So, remember when I accused the last movie of padding? Well, this isn't padding. This is an entirely separate film that got shoehorned in because the filmmakers couldn't make the Rider part last an hour and a half. Other than her getting infected with the nanomachines, Chiharu's subplot has almost nothing to do with the rest of the film. And the couple of times they do try to make it fit with the main plot, it fits about as well as a circular peg through a square hole. It just doesn't work. I have a bit more to say on the matter, but we're almost done with the movie, so I just want to get this over with before I say any more. Realizing that Shocker had transformed his sister into a monster, Kazumi spills the beans. They plan to take the nanomachines they used on him and spread them all across Japan. Ichigo and Nigo ride out to stop them while Kotomi deals with the Chiharu situation. Spoilers, she doesn't accomplish much. Focusing on the part of the movie I actually give a damn about, the masked duo attack Shocker as they're preparing to infect the entire country. However, even their combined strength doesn't seem to be enough, which does make sense since they're not just fighting random mooks. These are other Kamen Riders they're battling against, guys that are on their level. Luckily, Kamen Rider V3 arrives at the nick of time, fighting for the good guys because that's what his sister would have wanted, which, sure, whatever. They strike their iconic poses and start kicking ass. Our bug-eyed trio is eventually victorious, but right as V3 is finishing off the last of Shocker's goons, his sister appears from fucking nowhere because Kotomi failed to properly wrap up that plot thread. She begs for death and Kazumi reluctantly gives it to her. With the day saved, our heroes go their separate ways. Kazumi vowing to keep on living for his sister, Takeshi gets fired from his teaching job because of an earlier scene where he scared off some bullies by wrecking their bike, and Ichimonji passes on while surrounded by beautiful women. What in the name of fruit cheese has happened here? This movie is a failure on so many levels. As a sequel to Kamen Rider the First, while it does continue the story, it doesn't really advance it. It's just the heroes thwarting the villain's current scheme, which is fine for a serialized TV show, but for a movie sequel, I think there needs to be a bit more. I think the places Takeshi and Ichimonji ended up after the events of first film makes sense for their characters, but not when Shocker is still an active force. They were both former agents of the organization. They both should know that Shocker operates in multiple locations around the world, and they would never leave them alone for as long as they exist. It is a serious plot hole that the film doesn't even attempt to address, and I know I mentioned it earlier, but Asuka being forgotten is also pretty frustrating. As an adaptation of V3, well, it's just not. Outside of using that season's writer, I didn't see any parallels between the show and the movie. It's possible that the whole infecting Japan with nanomachines thing is meant to be a take on the nuclear weapon plot that started V3, but I think that's a stretch. And as a film in its own right, well, if I didn't know any better, I'd say it was directed by Harvey Dent. It's one half superhero flick and one half B-horror movie, and they did not do a good job at melding the two together. The experience of watching this movie is like constantly flipping between two different TV channels. Assuming you remember what it's like to actually flip through TV channels and not just stream everything. And while the fight scenes were superbly done as always, in this case it just wasn't enough to keep me engaged. Shouldn't be a surprise, didn't like this one. Someone for the love of God find me an outro.
You gotta stand up when you're